Okay, hi BookTube, Aaron here. Thanks for dropping by. With it being a Tuesday, I thought I'd do a tag video, but it's getting a little late in the day here, so I thought I'd do one where I don't have to prepare too much. So I thought I'd jump in on the top 5 English novels tag. If you've seen any of my videos in the past, you've probably heard me rattling on at some point about how I find it quite hard to actually come up with, top 5 or even a top 10 list for authors or for favourite books. I just find it quite hard to make up my mind to be so definitive about it. But I thought I'd give it a go, and it's been fun seeing so many people doing this, and I'm sure if you're watching you've seen loads of other people doing it. I believe it started with Eric Carl Anderson over on his channel. I'll try and link his original video and some of the others, particularly Shelley Swearingen's, since she weaponised it into a tag. But yeah, we'll see how it goes. We have a few glaring omissions here, some great English authors who haven't made the cut for me. And also there's one wild card in there as well, but we'll get to that at some point. So let's start off with my number 5 and then work up to number 1. So my number 5 is The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins. I really want to have a suspenseful, gripping and fairly chunky Victorian novel in here, and it is essentially it's a sensation novel, a bit of a mystery to it. It is a kind of typical man marrying for money kind of story, with all these dark family secrets on both sides, but it's a bit more complex than that. But I think I was umming and ahhing between this and The Moonstone, and this just has this weird, spooky, uncanny quality to it that I really love. It's been a while since I read it, but that's what really comes across to me. And yeah, I still think very fondly of this book. And yeah, I look back to the time that I read it very fondly as well. So I popped this up at my number 5. That it's just so gripping and fun, and I have good memories. So my number 4 pick is my wild card, because you'd think for your top 5 English novels that you would be picking novelists from England, and this is a novelist who wrote this novel in England, who had settled down in England and wrote in English, but they weren't born in England and they didn't grow up in England, but for me I think it still makes the cut, and I'll try and get into that. We'll see if I make any sense, but it's The Secret Agent by Joseph Conrad. So Joseph Conrad was born in, I believe, what's now Poland, and he moved around a bit, and English was his third language, but eventually he settled down in England, made that his home, and wrote all his novels in English, and this is it's one of those books that for the time it's written in, it just seems to go much further than you'd expect it to go, sort of emotionally and psychologically, and even just thematically. So it's about double agents in England, and about essentially terrorists, and trying to set up these explosions to start, just anarchy in England. And yeah, I think it's brilliantly written, and it's tragic but really, really good. And yeah, I think for me, having Conrad on this list kind of represents a kind of a welcoming Englishness that I'd like to see more of, and it's definitely there. And yeah, I thought I'd put it in there to represent that and promote that. Then coming in at number 3, a bit more of a typical one, and the more and more I think about it, I look back and see it as a novel I really love and have really enjoyed not only reading but thinking about, and that's Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. And yeah, I mean, I don't really know what I can say about it, and again, like many of the books on this list, it does have some flaws. Some things about this that maybe a modern reader might find a bit annoying. But for me, it's fascinating, and I've said before, particularly the bit with Frankenstein's monster, when he is sort of recounting his story after he's run away, and he's really showing his ambitions, and then how cruelly the world has treated him in the face of those ambitions and hopes. I just think it's brilliant. I think it's almost the high point of romantic language and writing in English as well. That kind of sort of sublime, sort of just I don't know, that the writing is full of terror and openness, in a way that then when I go back to romantic poets, I almost sometimes feel it's missing something that I find in Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. So yeah, that's my number 3 pick. Then going on to number 2, this is a book that when I was a kid I would have said was my favourite novel, and maybe a couple of years ago I wouldn't have considered it in this list, but I've been rereading it, and it's just reminded me of how great it is, and that's the Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. So I have The Fellowship of the Ring here, for the purpose of holding up a book, but I really mean the whole of Lord of the Rings as one novel. And yeah, I mean, I've found that I think Tolkien's writing is terrific. It's really evocative. It really changes to suit the setting, and the situation of the characters. And I mean, he really is a storyteller. And maybe that's something that it didn't stand out to me so much the first time I read it when I was about 10 years old. Maybe because I was reading more stories that were like that had a narrator that felt more like a storyteller, perhaps. So it didn't stand out as much. But now coming back to it, I think that's the one quality that I really love the most. And once I start reading, when I'm just hearing these words being told to me, almost it feels like that. I find it very hard to stop. I could just keep going for ages. So yeah, Lord of the Rings is my number 2, and I'm very glad it's on here. And then my number 1 is then a book that I doubt would make many other people's top 5 English novels. And to be honest, I'm not entirely sure whether you'd count it as a novel. It clocks in at around 180 pages. So maybe just a little over novella. I'm never exactly sure where to put that distinction. But it's News from Nowhere by William Morris. And this is a sort of a speculative utopian science fiction story. And it's about a guy who wakes up and finds himself in the future. And it's in direct conversation with this book. It's Edward Bellamy's Looking Backward, 2000 to 1887. And this is the exact same sort of blanket premise. It's a guy essentially falling asleep, waking up and finding himself in the future. But the two futures between these books are starkly different. So, I mean, you can probably tell by the covers that they're going to be very different books. And so in Looking Backwards, we have a very, it's almost the classic socialist, very modernist future where everything's industrialised and all the workers love what they're doing, and they're really working towards these aims and these goals, and they really feel like society is progressing. And that latter part of that, with people working towards the common good, feeling that society is progressing, that's a quality that is shared in Not Going Nowhere, News from Nowhere by William Morris. Going Nowhere would be maybe a little more realistic. But with News from Nowhere, the key difference is where this future goes and where Bellamy's is more industrialised. For William Morris, he wants to envision a future where we've really gone back to nature, and we're all working on the land. And yeah, it's just a really beautiful, idyllic picture, and it really speaks to the more idealistic part of my brain, and that there's a part of me that wouldn't mind life at all like this, with people living off the land, with there being no sense of money or ownership to anything, and you just go where you're needed, for work. You could essentially wander around, and if you see there's need and you think you're able to do it, then you help out. And that's essentially what the people do in this novel. And there are glaring holes, in this vision. Just human nature and selfishness and self-preservation, they're going to get right in the way of that. But still, there's something really luring to this, and something quite romantic and idyllic that really appeals to me. And again, it's one of those books, kind of like Frankenstein, where it's not only the reading experience that I love, but it's a book that I just come back and think about all the time. So there we go. That's my top 5 English novels as they stand. And on the whole, in a way, they kind of there's much more Victorian stuff in there, and maybe particularly with William Morris, and it's showing more of the positive side of my brain, the less the less bitter part of my brain. But maybe we'd have to get to my top 5 European or American novels for me to let that part of my brain loose a little bit. But there we go. So we've got The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins. We have The Secret Agent by Joseph Conrad. Frankenstein or the Modern Prometheus by Mary Shelley. The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. And News from Nowhere by William Morris. They're my top 5 English novels. It'd be great to see, if you haven't done it already, what your top 5 English novels are. But for now, that's all from me, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.